In today's competitive global market, one needs to have comprehensive real-life entrepreneurial knowledge, skills to increase clientele base, exposure to online business activities, and ability to plan and write workable business plans. Grow your business to unprecedented heights. For these and other interesting growth management related solutions, watch Small to Large Enterprise TV right here on this channel.
You're on Small to Large Enterprise presentation, and today's discussion is focused on planning a must in recession times. With you is me as a presenter, Kwame Afaglo. In recession times, since 2007, 2008 till date, any manager or entrepreneur who leads his or her team or organization on guesswork or hunches or on emotions is heading the organization into fold-up, or what we call into administration. Guesswork and emotionally driven management is synonymous to anywhere land, or managerially what we call Alice in anywhere land or Alice in Wonderland. That Wonderland is not where we are expected to be because we are in a globally competitive world. Competition has upped. Managers no longer are expected to operate on guesswork or hunches or emotionally driven concepts. They are supposed to come up with carefully thought out actions or carefully thought out theories that when implemented are likely to bring success, most likely to bring success, even the better. So planning is a must-have for any manager in our times. Plans are formulated before the commencement of work, or the outcome of an activity is a plan. Plans are bound naturally to be time-oriented. Any plan without time limits is undefined and is not easy to be accessible. And so scientific management is equally important in all the managerial practices that we keep presenting about. Plans are internally stored. The fine details are internally stored, but the summaries or the synopses are made public for consumers and the rest of the world to identify what activity the organization mostly is into. Let's look at what plans are not. Plans are not any gargantuan or large documents to impress colleagues or shareholders without focus. Plans should not be cryptic, and its interpretation being difficult for colleagues, it shouldn't be. Plans must not be unachievable. Fine details of plans, as I said earlier on, must not be made public. It's only the synopsis that must be made public, in other words. Inferring from the aforementioned what plans are not, we can simply say planning is a carefully thought out process aimed at achieving organizational goals and within defined time. The main concepts here is carefully thought out, then process, achieving organizational goals, and then time. So those are the pillars that we shall carry out our discussions on. Carefully thought out. Hunches are out. Emotionally driven is out. How can it be carefully thought out? For existing organizations, there must have been a trend. There must be data. So they need to rely on data and study the trend of events. And out of that, they can estimate what the future is or postulate into the future what their returns on investments are. This analytical tool has to be gotten from, more often than not, from training, be it pest analysis, SWOT analysis, net present value, and all other statistical tools. In determining what the trends are, needs to be acquired from training, fundamentally. Nobody is born with most of this knowledge. Critical thinking here is equally important, that one needs to go through each and every process, each and every paradigm, carefully, establish the advantages, establish the disadvantages, establish the cultural, geocultural relativities. They are equally important in managing this concept of planning and carefully thought out as one of the factors. Managing on intuition, one man or one woman driven organization based on intuition is no more. Either than that, one is not likely to achieve that large enterprise status that one has been looking for. Some firms, if you observe, especially on factory floors, they come up with what the production histogram is, and that tells everyone what they are achieving and gives them the chance to forecast into the future. So we have a histogram such as this that points as to what the future production levels are, or sales level, or returns levels are. This is carefully thought out. Another concept of carefully thought out is scenario planning, what if, which we have spoken a lot in previous presentation. What if the unknown happens? How prepared is management? How prepared is the team? What if incomes drop? Disposable incomes drop in the country. What if the product reaches its maturity? How do you reinvent yourself? How do you re-engineer or restructure? Most people keep talking about rebranding. Re-engineering could be looked at. What if the machine fails? What if government regulation changes? What if there's even deflation, where there's not enough money to chase the many goods that we have? You can do this out of brainstorming or groupthink, where the team meets to discuss issues and identify thought patterns, analytical ways of doing things. And that can be done in various forms. There are various presentations that would lead one to identifying that process for an organization. All right. The other factor we discussed, or driven out of, or extracted out of the definition, could be looking at what? Process of planning. What is the process of planning? Is it provoking, time-consuming exercise? Is that process provoking? Is it time-consuming? Would you want to go through the planning process, or not go through at all and expect success, or go through the planning process, implement and meet success, or even failure, and use that as the base for growth? Which would you prefer? Or you prefer just planning and planning and planning and planning and not taking any action? That is planning malaise. Small and macro organizations have planning as an integral part of their activities. Managers in small and micro organizations have planning as an integral component. However, large corporations more often than not have a department for planning. Planning could be what? Bottom up. That's some authorities call scheduling, bottom up. Planning could be top down, or is it flattened? Let's look at the bottom up, which is scheduling, which is rather quite very interesting. Unlike the top down, the top down time limit is fixed on an activity, but the bottom up takes the pain in gathering all the departments to deliberate on issues. Each and every activity, each and every stage is well carefully drawn out. The time for achieving each milestone is well identified till the final project is completed, and that is what bottom-up comes up with. It has its own advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages of bottom-up approach or scheduling, it empowers staff because they are all involved. It starts from the bottom, the respective unit, all the way to senior managerial roles, and so all employees are involved, and so they own it, they are passionate about it, and so it becomes realistic and achievable. Of course, that synergy is brought in. There's a sense of belonging. All junior staff and senior staff participated, so there's that high sense of belonging. It assists in cutting waste. It encourages surplus because this plan was orchestrated from the bottom. Significantly will reduce attrition rate. In other words, will boost staff retention. Increase innovation because most thoughts from the planning stage is from the bottom up as a process. Some of the disadvantages are parochial plans. Some departments come up with plans that they can just manage with, just for a few months or a short term, and then they leave it as it stands. Some other departments go in for departmental reverie. The we versus them. Our department, we want to achieve this. Your department has nothing to do with us. And that itself is a recipe for disaster. It's unhealthy for bottom up. And so the we versus them has to be gotten out if one starts using systems thinking or one starts using the flattened structure. The bottom up does work. Let's look at another process. That is the top down. This is where management meets and brainstorm and give the rest of the staff the decisions, the strategic direction. The rest of the staff are not involved. They only send the plan up to the board of directors for approval. Once board of directors approve it, they bring it down to middle level and operational staff to implement without enough of their involvement. If the board complains of a section which is not significant, then the plan can get on. Mostly budgets, it can get on whilst changes are being made. If a significant section has been queried by a board, then of course it has to be remade. For as long as the top-down fixes the time frame and achievement, targets achievement and goals for the organization, what they do is they pass it down to middle level and then operational staff, and they all work towards that, and that's what mostly we call management by objectives. So the board is also involved. Another process is the flattened structure, where some organizations organize a DEBA for everyone to contribute. It's a primary information gathering point. Everybody contributes. And when management fine-tunes it, they come bring it back to the DEBA for affirmation before it is sent up to the board. So theoretically, the process must meet what business schools normally describe as SMART. That is an acronym, S for specific. All the goals or the thoughts must be specific. It must not be cryptic. It must be measurable. I keep mentioning scientific management. It has to be empirical. Whatever we're doing, we have to be able to count for evaluative purposes. It has to be, A is achievable. You don't set targets that are not achievable. You only set ones that you can achieve. Realistic. If it's not realistic, don't venture into it. Some organizations, based on their research and department unit, come up with futuristic products, which to some managers are not achievable, but given the chance, it can be used for what if. Say the case of Xerox and a computer peripheral that some of the scientists were working with Xerox came up with a peripheral, and Xerox at the time said they were only into photocopying, so they ignored that peripheral. But then another computer company mopped up that product and are using it. Today, about 20 years on, Xerox photocopiers have become computerized. If they had taken this concept, flattened organizational structure as a process, carefully, seriously, they wouldn't have missed that computerization stage. Time-bound. Every activity must be defined with time. Is it a day that it has to be achieved? Is it a year? Is it 3 years? Contingencies or exigency plans are put down such that if the event happens, then you unleash it. If it doesn't happen, it's still on paper. It's touched nicely and stored in the cabinet. If it happens, you unleash it to solve the problem or to overcome the challenge. Competition has upped, as I keep saying. So emergency facilities for especially financial institutions that needs to be offshore is important. Database, data protection, information kept out offshore of a particular geographical location is important, especially in countries where energy supply is not constant, in countries where change of government is not properly defined. Financial institutions in particular need to keep their data in another country to avoid the unexpected. Some time-bound plans could be strategic, or some can be tactical. Being strategic means it's long-term. Being tactical means it is short-term. Short term, granted that there's a manager in a restaurant who has been approached, a Ghanaian meal providing restaurant, and has been approached by a customer that is it possible that he or she can provide them Mediterranean meals for a party in 2 weeks' time at a value of $5,000 US. If the manager cannot think on the spot and say yes, but or no, but says let me consult my boss or my directors, call in 72 hours time. The customer or prospective customer calls in 3 days time, and there's not definite response. That manager is actually what? Costing the organization good money. And so such tactical decisions must be taken, and managers in recession time must have that authority to take decisions up to a certain fiscal defined amount. It's become implicit that managers must have that tactical responsibility. Contingency plan, as we've talked about, in terms of exigency. Budgets are financial plans that are time-bound, maybe a year. Say you want to build 20 aeroplanes in a year. Of course, it has to be determined, and it has to go into the budget. That is what contingency is also looking at. Granted that a battery of a flight drops, what do you do? Do you have backup? Yes, that is also contingency, and it's time defined. It turns a bit quite funny, but all activities when it comes to planning must be time defined. Tunnel vision managers are not worth it, especially in contingency times, because in contingency, you may not expect the unforeseen to happen this year or next year. In any time, you don't even know when it will happen. If it so happens in the seventh year, all the savings for contingency planning would have been kept in the bank, and that some managers see as locking up of capital. But the day it happens, that's the day there is either a success for the organization or there is failure for the organization. Granted, the market is saturated, the product has reached its saturation point, and this exigency fund is in there. The manager, having the what if plan, can quickly produce or release new products onto the market because it has that financial base, and such planning is equally important. Planning has become a must-do activity in such recession times. We are in recession times. There's not enough jobs. We need to create jobs. What we need to do, we need to start planning, growing organizations from small or micro entities through the trajectory to large enterprises, because our shareholders want more dividends. Staff want increase in wages or salary, and those are things that has to be taken seriously. Else, the organization, especially the chief executive, will be rolled out of the place. If the chief executive of the MD, managing director, doesn't have any plan, there's a likelihood that he or she will drive the organization to anywhere land. And anywhere land is anywhere land. You cannot access it. And that is not good enough for planning. Plans could go through this triangle. It's a closed loop triangle where customers may give information out of customer feedback to staff, and staff will pass it on to management. That process is a conceptualization process. Information from customers or consumers are captured, then put into the initiation stage, fine-tuned, gotten funds for, procured all accessories or all implements for it, then put into practice, implementation. When it's in practice or implementation, you evaluate it. After evaluation, it goes back to conceptualization stage and then roll back. Any error that is made out of evaluation can be detected and then fixed. And that is equally important. Implementation, you cannot avoid. If you decide to go through only the planning stage, then you go through planning malaise, as I said earlier on. Evaluation is a periodic activity. Monitoring is daily. It's better supervisors carry out everyday checks on activities to avoid errors than to allow the error to persist and continue for an evaluation that may be an annual activity to happen. That tends to be very costly and not good for the organization. So monitoring is one important process that we need to capture with. And so I think that with planning, we would have come to an end of one section of the presentation with planning. Subsequently, we go on and planning runs through most of the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
In today's competitive global market, one needs to have comprehensive real-life entrepreneurial knowledge, skills to increase clientele base, exposure to online business activities, and ability to plan and write workable business plans. Grow your business to unprecedented heights. For these and other interesting growth management related solutions, watch Small to Large Enterprise TV right here on this channel.